Okay, so short stories. One caveat here is I am focusing more on narrative short storytelling rather than experimental, and I'll get more into that in a bit. But in general, what makes a compelling short story? Typically, you're trying to focus on a single character, a single event, a single turning point. Not to say you don't flesh it out, you do flesh it out, but in general, you don't want a large cast of characters, you don't want a lot of subplots like you would in a novel. This seems obvious, but a lot of times when people are switching from novel to short story, they try to pack in a lot of characters. So if you're running into a short story that's too complex, strip away some of that. Strip away scenes that don't seem necessary. If you can minimize characters, that's helpful. For the narrative short story, you want a really strong beginning and the inciting incident, right, when something happens, and then an ending that is satisfying. And we'll get into tips how to achieve those 3 points. Economic language. So, because it's so short, in a short story, you want to consider every word more carefully than you would in a novel. So, really make all the words work for you. We'll have tips on how to do that as well. And then lastly, this is a very important point because this is where I see a lot of new writers and also pro writers slip into this, which is they'll write a vignette instead of a story. And vignette is more of a scene where nothing happens. And we'll talk more about how to make sure your story is not a vignette. So keep that in mind. And then one other caveat, a lot of short stories don't go by any of these guidelines, right? It's kind of like learn the rules and then you can break them. There's a lot of great experimental short stories out there. There's a lot of short stories that are more like poems. Those are all great, but here we're really focused on narrative, commercial short stories. Once you kind of get the hang of it, then, break the rules and experiment more. Okay. And then I love this quote at the bottom. What many people resist is what's testily dismissed as a typical New Yorker short story, a tale in which nothing much happens to one or more not especially interesting people until it all ends on a note of melancholy ambiguity. Now, it's kind of a funny quote because, like, we'd all love to be in the New Yorker, right? But I think the point here is, you want to make an engaging, interesting story that will really stay with people, right? And then the horror genre is actually especially good for short stories. I put up some examples here of some of my favorite short stories from comics, film, and books. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that a lot of us read as kids, and some of those stories still stay with you decades later. I love Tales from the Crypt and Creepshow. Similarly, Twilight Zone does short storytelling very well, right? Where there's a short one episode, there's some sort of twist that usually you're not expecting, and it just leaves you like amazed and shocked and horrified at the end. And then Cabinet of Curiosities, I think it was on Netflix, and it featured short horror stories pulled mainly from fiction. And that was also, I thought, pretty well done. Um, so short stories, they have high stakes, they have visceral reactions in the horror genre. They often explore deep societal fears and psychological stress in a way that's cathartic. And when you learn to master short horror stories, you're going to understand tension and timing and how to keep readers hooked and create a story that resonates long after the first line. And then quickly, why horror? Like, why do people like horror? And I get asked this a lot. And for me personally, I did not consider myself a horror writer for a very long time, even though I was actually writing horror. And the reason is I don't like slashers, I don't like gore, I'm a pretty anxious person. But horror is a spectrum, right? There is so much under the umbrella of horror. Um, and what people enjoy in the horror world will differ completely. And there have been studies showing, by age, gender, how empathetic somebody is can make them more stressed out with horror, how much they enjoy an adrenaline rush. So people come to horror for a lot of different reasons. And some of them are listed here, right? Stimulation, you feel excited, get an adrenaline rush if you're watching a horror movie and it's super creepy. For me, I like the second one, learning like any kind of apocalypse story is almost like a survival instruction manual or like how to deal with serial killers, right? You kind of watch it and you're like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or, don't separate alone in a haunted house kind of thing. A lot of people feel catharsis right after horror. You've survived. Like maybe the main character didn't, but you as the viewer, you survived. Horror can be a great way to process, right? Fears, traumas. As a kid, I had really severe arachnophobia. I was very afraid of spiders. So what movie did I watch all the time? Arachnophobia, a movie about spiders. Like I was obsessed with it. Um, and then lastly, enjoyment. Horror can be just fun, right? Around campfire, telling horror stories, going to a horror movie. There's some enjoyment in the bonding there. And I love this quote from John Carpenter, who's the creator of The Thing, the movie. Horror is a universal language. We're all afraid. We're born afraid. We're all afraid of things, death, disfigurement, loss of a loved one. So horror is very fundamental. Fear is very fundamental to all of us, right? And horror, as I mentioned, is a huge umbrella. There's a lot of genres under it. And you don't necessarily have to classify your stories in a subgenre, but it can be helpful to think about the genres as you're writing your story because you want to think about the core fear that you end up writing about. What does it represent, right? And that can help you flesh out the story more.